Well, hello, welcome back to Critical Weight Theory, the show where we sometimes talk about what's going on beneath the surface of human behavior, why we react the way we do, what drives our choices, how we make sense of a world that is always changing. Today's episode is about something we've definitely seen, maybe even you've done it yourself, but might not have thought much about how people react when they're confronted with ideas that threaten their worldview. Why do we freeze up, argue, make jokes, or just mentally check out? What's really going on when someone uses sarcasm instead of answering a tough question? Why do we resist even relatively harmless change, even when we know deep down it's necessary, or at least that the change is going to happen anyway? So let's explore that a little bit. When people are hit with unfamiliar or threatening information about their culture, their beliefs, their identity, many just freeze. They have that freeze response, not physically necessarily, but psychologically. You've probably seen this during arguments or heated discussions. Blank stares, awkward silence, someone saying, I don't know, I just don't want to talk about it. And it's easier to see it when that someone is somebody else, isn't it? And isn't that convenient? We tend not to see it in ourselves as much as others. It's like a form of psychological paralysis, defense. The brain senses danger, not necessarily physical, but existential or emotional, and says, shut it down. It's like a survival mechanism. When the stakes feel high, we instinctively fall back on whatever keeps us safe. Another response is to fight or rationalize. For some people, freezing isn't the go to. They fight, perhaps not always physically, but with argumentation. This is where we get the argumentation contest effect. When new information challenges someone's core beliefs, political, religious, cultural, they often respond as if they're in a debate they must win. The goal isn't understanding, it's defending identity. Well, in some cases, anyway. Of course, there's always going to be some argument, some debate, and sometimes they're valid. But in a lot of cases, we end up applying debate tactics without necessarily caring who actually wins with the factual, you know, truth of it all. We just like the fight rather than to actually know who is correct or who is more on the correct side. And that usually is the case with a debate. Usually there is more of a winning side and more of a losing side. And oddly enough, there are two different varieties of that. There's the person who looks like they lost because they didn't apply the correct tactics in an argument or debate. And then there is, like I suggested earlier, the side or the part that, you know, looks like they won or lost based on the facts actually being on their side. You know, two different sets of winning or losing, really. And here's what usually kicks in. You've got denial, resistance, rationalization, self justification, projection. They might not say I feel threatened, but the behavior can say it all. They'll start throwing around all sorts of distractions in the middle of the discussion, and a bunch of roadblocks will be set up, and it can also shut any sort of discussion down. Of course, I mean, to make things quirkier, if you're having a debate between two people, sometimes both sides can be, wrong. Sometimes they might have a little bit of truth to it, on both sides. And I guess in some rare cases, maybe they're both equally correct. If you could come up with an example of that, I'd be interested in hearing that. And, there's also defense by distraction, humor, sarcasm, irony can be applied in that way. It's a different kind of defense if you think about humor. Some people joke their way through conflict or discomfort, and honestly, it's effective until it isn't, of course. Sarcasm, irony, self deprecating humor, these are all ways people can mask pain, insecurity, or even depression. It's what psychologists call a defense mechanism. Instead of saying, this or that hurt me, someone says, wow, guess I'm just the worst person alive, huh? And they might be smirking while they're doing it or something. It works because it creates emotional distance and makes the moment feel lighter, less threatening, but it also keeps people from getting close and keeps the pain buried. According to psychologists and lived experience shared online, here's why it happens. You sometimes want to deflect vulnerability. Humor keeps people from seeing the raw stuff underneath. It can control perception. If you're the funny one, you can control how people see you. It can avoid confrontation. Sarcasm lets you express discomfort without being too open. And it can give you the sense of having the upper hand. Irony can make you feel smarter or above the situation. And maybe feel like you're not being judged as much. If you make fun of yourself first, no one else can hurt you. That's one of the reasons we are self deprecating. It's like armor, it can protect you, but it can also isolate you. So, I guess I'll ask you, what are your defense mechanisms? What's your go to? Think about this. What's your go to move when you feel threatened, judged, or challenged? Do you crack a joke? Do you change the subject? Do you lash out, get sarcastic, or pretend not to care? Do you rationalize or downplay? Do you blame someone else or blame yourself exclusively? Those are all things, all roads we can go down, with a variety of topics. They're all different ways of coping with discomfort. None of them make you a bad person. Well, not necessarily anyway. They're just signals, signs that something deeper is going on, and recognizing them is the first step to doing something different. If you're sort of doing these too much as an evasive habit, so you can go from reaction to reflection. That's really the good news. These responses aren't set in stone, at least not in most cases, I suppose. I, I guess some people would be harder to change their behavior with than others, but you can usually move from automatic reaction to conscious reflection. So, next time you feel yourself freeze, argue, or joke through a serious moment, try asking yourself, what am I really feeling? What am I trying to protect? What am I trying to project? What would happen if I didn't defend myself right now? And I think there are definitely moments in life where it would pay to do that. It's not to say no arguments are valid. I almost said like I was saying the word Valium or something. Valid. It's not about never using humor or never defending your beliefs, because sometimes it's valid to do that. It's about knowing when those things are helping and when they're just shielding you from becoming a better person, which can be the case. So that's basically today's episode. If it made you think or made you feel seen, share it with someone. And if you want to dive deeper into this sort of stuff, feel free to subscribe, leave a review, or just come back next week because I might be talking about a similar thing. And remember, the way we cope says a lot about who we are, but it doesn't define who we have to be. So until next time, take care of yourself and maybe check in on your inner sarcastic voice. It might be trying to tell you something. Oh, just for fun, I'll have a little bonus thing here. I created a comprehensive list of reactions that we can have. So there's denial, resistance, avoidance, rationalization, accommodation, compromise, self justification, feelings of insecurity, powerlessness, anxiety, fear, vulnerability, humiliation, shame, guilt, outrage, sarcasm and disdain, ridicule, humor, irony, deflection, disclaimers, downplaying, blaming others, trivializing, minimizing, intellectualizing, which I guess is sort of what I'm doing here, denying responsibility, justifying, excusing, blaming oneself instead, because sometimes, there are moments where the other person is way more to blame, and sometimes, it can be a problem if you're not blaming them and blaming yourself more than that other person. Blaming circumstances rather than oneself, scapegoating, projecting onto others, which I mentioned earlier, redefining terms so definitions don't apply, making excuses, taking refuge in absolutes or dogmatism. My side has always been right, creating false dichotomies or binary oppositions, playing dumb, being overly simplistic, using coercion or intimidation to get rid of unwanted thoughts or behaviors, becoming aggressive, condescending, superioristic. And technically, superioristic is not a word, but it sounds like one. And it's sort of funny how superioristic sounds so much more like a word than inferioristic. And both of those make me think of supercalifragilisticexpialidocious, which is a cute little song that you can listen to. But anyway, that's my list of buzzwords that could be relating to this type of situation. And I guess that's about it for this episode. So have a good one.